The first time I saw the old oak tree in my backyard, I knew it was special. Towering over the fence line, its branches stretched wide, offering shade and shelter. It reminded me of the treehouse my dad had built for me when I was little, a place where my imagination could run wild. Years later, when I bought my own home, I wanted to recreate that magic for my kids, Liam, 10, and Ava, 7. "Do you really think we could build a treehouse, Mom?" Liam's eyes sparkled with hope as he stared at the massive oak. "Not just any treehouse." I grinned, ruffling his hair. "We'll build the coolest treehouse ever." Over the next few weeks, we sketched out ideas, a wooden ladder, a wraparound deck, and even a pulley system for snacks. My neighbor, Tom, who was a retired carpenter, helped us construct it properly. By the end of the month, the treehouse was complete. It had a tiny porch with flower boxes, string lights that twinkled at night, and a small slide attached to the side. My kids were ecstatic. But apparently, not everyone was thrilled. A few days later, I found a stiff white envelope tucked into my mailbox. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure. You are in violation of HOA Policy 12.4, which prohibits any structures over 6 feet without board approval. Please remove the treehouse within 14 days. I stare at the letter in disbelief. Are they serious? I muttered. The treehouse was in my backyard, nowhere near the street. It wasn't obstructing anyone's view. When I called the HOA, I got Margaret, the board president. Her voice was clipped and condescending. "It's against the rules, Ms. Carter. You'll need to remove it." "But it's for my kids." I protested. "They love it." "Rules are rules," she snapped. I hung up, fuming. I refused to back down. The treehouse was safe, charming, and meant the world to my children. So I decided to fight back. I printed out a petition and went door to door, explaining the situation. My neighbors were sympathetic. Many had children or grandchildren who loved the treehouse too. By the end of the week, I had over 60 signatures, nearly the entire block. At the next HOA meeting, I confidently presented the petition. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she scanned the signatures. "The rules are clear," she said coldly. "The treehouse must come down, petition or not." Her smug smile made my blood boil. Days later, the fines began. $100 a day for noncompliance. Then they charged me for visual obstruction, adding another $50 daily. Margaret was relentless. When I refused to pay, they filed a lien on my home. I stood in my kitchen, clutching the violation notice with shaky hands. My kids were playing in the treehouse, unaware that it was now the source of financial warfare. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I reached out to Tom, my carpenter neighbor. "Margaret's got the board in her pocket," he growled. "You need to go bigger." So I contacted a local news station. I explained how the HOA was targeting a single mom over a harmless treehouse and using legal intimidation tactics. The producer was hooked immediately. "We'll send a crew," she promised. 2 days later, news vans rolled into the neighborhood. Margaret's face turned a furious shade of red when she saw the cameras. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Julie, interviewed me in front of the treehouse. "My children play here every day," I said, holding back tears. "This treehouse is their safe place. And now the HOA wants to destroy it over some ridiculous rule." The camera cut to footage of my kids giggling in the treehouse, Liam helping Ava with the pulley system. The public outrage was swift. Within hours of the broadcast, the story went viral. The video racked up millions of views. Comments flooded in. "Shame on that HOA. Let the kids have their treehouse. This is why people hate HOAs. Stand your ground." Someone started GoFundMe to fight this. The public backlash was relentless. HOA board members' names were plastered across social media. Their emails were flooded with angry messages. And then came the attorneys, big ones. The news coverage drew the attention of a high-profile law firm that specialized in HOA abuse cases. They offered to represent me pro bono. Margaret was blindsided when I walked into the next HOA meeting with my lawyer by my side. The board's faces paled when they realized they were in over their heads. My lawyer slammed down a cease and desist order and announced we were filing a civil lawsuit for harassment and damages. Faced with mounting legal fees and public backlash, the board crumbled. Margaret resigned. Several board members followed. The HOA's shady financial practices were exposed, and they were forced to repay thousands in unlawful fines. My lawyer negotiated a settlement, and the HOA not only backed off but was required to pay my legal fees. The neighborhood celebrated my victory. Parents brought their kids over to play in the treehouse. Neighbors gathered for barbecues under its shade. One morning, I found a handmade plaque left by Tom nailed to the treehouse. It read, "The treehouse that beat the HOA." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. And when Liam and Ava ran out to play, their laughter filled the yard, ringing with the sound of freedom and victory. After the news story went viral, I began receiving hundreds of messages from people across the country. Parents, veterans, and even retirees shared their own horror stories of HOA harassment. A woman from Florida, Lisa Turner, wrote, "My HOA tried to evict me for building a wheelchair ramp for my disabled son. You've given me hope. Thank you for fighting back." I was moved to tears. I knew I couldn't stop at just my victory. I had to help others. That week, I used the settlement money from my lawsuit to launch a legal fund, Treehouse Defenders, fighting back against HOA abuse. The fund helped cover legal fees for families battling unjust HOA rules. Within a month, we helped 5 families fight back and win. Just as I was celebrating our growing movement, Margaret resurfaced. She had slithered her way onto a nearby HOA board, just a few blocks away. Her reputation was tarnished, but her thirst for power remained. One morning, I spotted her walking by my house, glaring at the treehouse. Later that day, I received a cease and desist letter claiming the treehouse was now a public nuisance due to the increased attention it was drawing. I laughed out loud. "You're kidding me," I muttered, but Margaret was dead serious. She filed a new complaint, claiming the increased traffic from visitors to the treehouse was disrupting the neighborhood. But this time, I wasn't alone. The next HOA meeting was packed with neighbors. Parents, kids, and even elderly residents stood beside me, holding signs that read, "Treehouse Defenders Stand United. Keep our neighborhood free. No more HOA tyranny." When Margaret tried to read her complaint, she was booed into silence. The room erupted with applause when Tom, my carpenter neighbor, stood and said loudly, "We're sick of the bullying. This treehouse stays. You're the ones who should leave." Margaret's face turned scarlet. She slammed her folder shut and stormed out. Word of our movement continued to spread nationwide. A major news outlet ran a feature story on our legal fund, calling us the Treehouse Rebels, fighting HOA corruption one neighborhood at a time. Soon, people were sending donations, $10 here, $50 there. Within weeks, we had raised over $250,000 to support victims of HOA harassment. The treehouse itself became a symbol of resistance and hope. Local schools brought children for field trips, teaching them about fighting for what's right. Parents and kids left behind messages of support, tacking them to the tree's trunk. Keep fighting. This treehouse gave us hope. Freedom stands tall. But Margaret wasn't done. Seething with rage and desperate to regain power, she filed a frivolous lawsuit against me, claiming the treehouse devalued property values. She demanded $100,000 in damages. By now, I was armed with the best legal team money couldn't even buy. Thanks to our supporters, we countersued, demanding Margaret pay for emotional damages and defamation. The court case dragged on for months, but when the verdict was announced, the courtroom was packed with reporters and neighbors. The judge's voice rang out clearly. The court finds in favor of Ms. Carter. The treehouse will remain. Ms. Margaret Collins is ordered to pay $200,000 in damages and cover all legal fees. The room exploded in cheers. Margaret's face crumpled in shock. She stumbled out of the courtroom, humiliated and defeated. The night after the verdict, my backyard was filled with neighbors. We strung up lights around the treehouse and lit a bonfire. Liam and Ava played with their friends, climbing and laughing in the very treehouse the HOA had tried to destroy. Tom raised a glass of lemonade. "To freedom from HOA tyranny," he cheered. Everyone clapped and hollered, their faces lit with joy and relief. The treehouse stood tall and proud, illuminated against the night sky, a beacon of defiance and victory. Our story continued to spread, inspiring laws to be passed against HOA overreach. Politicians reached out, using our case as an example of neighborhood rights. The Treehouse Defenders Fund expanded, providing legal aid to over 200 families battling unjust HOA rules. I was invited to speak at legal conferences and community events. Standing before hundreds of people, I shared my story, how one treehouse became a symbol of resistance against unfair power. Years later, Liam and Ava grew older, but the treehouse remained. It became a neighborhood landmark, visited by locals and tourists alike. One day, Ava, now a teenager, sat beside me on the treehouse deck. "Mom," she said softly, her eyes filled with admiration, "I'll tell my kids about this place one day." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "And you'll tell them how we fought back and won." Bentwood Avenue would never forget the treehouse that stood against the HOA and won. A few months after the courtroom victory, my phone rang with an unexpected call. "Ms. Carter, this is Mayor Grant from Bentwood City Hall. I'd like to meet with you." "Curious," I agreed. When I arrived, the mayor smiled warmly and slid a folder across his desk. "We've been following your story. The community considers your treehouse a symbol of hope and resistance. We'd like to declare it an official neighborhood landmark." I stared at him in disbelief. "A landmark?" I repeated. He nodded. "Your fight has inspired people far beyond Bentwood. We want to preserve the treehouse and its message for generations to come." Tears welled to my eyes. I shook his hand, overwhelmed with emotion. The following weekend, the entire neighborhood gathered as the mayor unveiled a bronze plaque at the base of the tree. It read, "The treehouse that stood tall, a symbol of community strength and defiance against injustice." Neighbors clapped and cheered, and my kids beamed with pride. Even Tom, my neighbor and carpenter, got teary-eyed. "You built the treehouse, Emma, but you also built a legacy." The media attention didn't slow down. I started receiving calls from literary agents. "Emma," one of them said enthusiastically, "your story is powerful and inspiring. You should consider writing a book." At first, I hesitated. "I'm not a writer," I protested, but the agent persisted. "You're a fighter. You have a story that the world needs to hear." So, every night, after the kids went to bed, I sat by the treehouse with my laptop and began pouring my heart out onto the page. I wrote about the innocent joy of building the treehouse, the cruel fines and intimidation from the HOA, the legal battle and public outcry, the love and support from my community. After months of late nights and raw honesty, the book was finished. The Treehouse Rebels, Fighting Back Against HOA Tyranny. It was published nationwide and quickly became a bestseller, topping charts in the memoir and true crime categories. Readers flooded my inbox with messages. "You gave us the courage to fight back. Your story inspired us to stand up against our HOA bullies. We're building our own treehouse in your honor." As the Treehouse Defenders Fund grew, we were able to hire private investigators to expose corruption in multiple HOAs. It turned out that Margaret's board had been illegally pocketing fines and making shady deals with contractors. The scandal made national headlines. One by one, corrupt HOA boards were dismantled as homeowners filed lawsuits using the legal fund. Margaret's name became synonymous with HOA corruption, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board again. When the scandal broke, she was fired from her job and faced multiple civil lawsuits. With the book's royalties and the donations pouring in, I expanded the Treehouse Defenders Fund. We hired more lawyers and launched legal clinics to help families battle unjust HOA rules. I traveled across the country, speaking at town hall meetings, neighborhood association conferences, legal reform rallies. Everywhere I went, people shared their stories of harassment and intimidation by their HOAs. We successfully overturned unfair HOA bylaws in multiple states, giving homeowners more rights and protection. The Treehouse victory sparked a national movement. A grassroots campaign called #TreehouseRights gained momentum on social media, inspiring homeowners' rights groups across the country. People began filing petitions to limit HOA powers, passing new state-level laws that restricted unfair fines and protected homeowners' privacy. In California, a law was passed dubbed the Treehouse Bill that made it illegal for HOAs to fine families for recreational backyard structures without proven safety violations. Years passed, but the treehouse remained a symbol of our fight. On Ava's 16th birthday, she asked if she could invite her friends over to celebrate in the treehouse. Of course, I said, smiling. As the teens climbed into the treehouse, their laughter filled the yard, the same sound that had once been threatened by HOA greed. Later that night, Liam, now in college, came home for the weekend. He sat beside me on the porch, looking up at the twinkling lights strung along the treehouse. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "You know, that treehouse, it's not just a treehouse. It's where you taught us how to stand our ground." I wrapped my arm around him, my heart swelling with pride. "And it's where I learned how to fight for what matters most." I whispered. The treehouse became more than just a backyard structure. It became a local landmark. Families from neighboring towns came to visit, bringing their children to see the place that had started a movement. One day, a young mother with 2 kids knocked on my door. "Hi," she said with a hopeful smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your fight helped me save my son's playhouse. I thought you might like to meet him." Her son, a bright-eyed boy of about 5, held out a drawing. It was a colorful sketch of a treehouse with a sign that read, "Never back down." Tears filled my eyes as I knelt beside him and took the drawing. "Thank you," I whispered as they walked away. I turned and looked at the treehouse, still standing tall, still shining with the light of hope and defiance. 2 years after my courtroom victory, the Treehouse Defenders Fund had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We started with just a handful of cases, but by now, we were representing homeowners across the country, fighting against unjust HOA harassment. One afternoon, I sat in my living room, surrounded by stacks of case files and donation receipts, when my lawyer, Melissa, called. "Emma, I have some news," she said excitedly. "We've officially been approved as a 501c3 nonprofit organization." I blinked in surprise. "Wait, you mean we're official?" "Not just official," she laughed. "We're national now. You've built something that will protect homeowners for generations." I sat down, my hands trembling slightly. The nonprofit's mission was clear: provide free legal defense for families facing unjust HOA harassment, educate homeowners about their rights, push for legislation to protect communities from overreaching HOA power. Later that day, I stood in my backyard, looking at the treehouse that started it all, and whispered, "We did it." With the nonprofit thriving, media attention surged again. One day, I received a call from a film producer named Rachel Mendez. "Emma, your story has inspired millions," she said passionately. "We want to make a documentary about your fight against the HOA." I was hesitant at first. "Are you sure people will want to watch a whole film about a treehouse fight?" I asked. She chuckled. "Emma, it's not about the treehouse. It's about defying oppression and winning. People need to see that." Over the next few months, a camera crew followed me and my family. They interviewed Tom, my carpenter neighbor, who spoke about the early days of building the treehouse, Liam and Ava, who shared how the treehouse became their sanctuary during the battle, neighbors and supporters, who describe how our victory empowered the entire community. The documentary, titled "The Treehouse Rebels: Fighting Back Against HOA Tyranny," was released on streaming platforms and cable networks, reaching millions of viewers. Years passed. My children grew up, but the treehouse still stood tall, a constant reminder of our fight and victory. Liam, now in his mid-20s, had become a real estate lawyer. He specialized in defending homeowners from HOA abuse, directly inspired by the battle he witnessed as a child. One day, he came home from work and sat with me by the treehouse porch, just as we used to. "Mom," he said softly, "I had my first big win today. We helped a single mom fight back against her HOA and she won." Tears stung my eyes. "Just like us," I whispered. He smiled. Yeah, just like us. By the fifth anniversary of our victory, the town of Bentwood declared the first Saturday in June as Treehouse Day. It became an annual neighborhood celebration, honoring community strength and unity. The treehouse itself became a public gathering spot where families held birthday parties, barbecues, school field trips. During the first official Treehouse Day, Ava, now a college student studying social justice, gave a speech to the crowd. She stood on the treehouse balcony, the same spot where she had once giggled as a child. Her voice rang out with strength and pride. This treehouse is more than wood and nails. It's a symbol of standing up when you're pushed down. My mom fought for us, and now we fight for others. The crowd roared with applause, and I couldn't hold back the tears. After the documentary's massive success, Hollywood came knocking. A major film studio bought the rights to my story, and before I knew it, a feature film was in production. The casting was surreal. Emma Carter was played by a famous, award-winning actress, capturing both my vulnerability and strength. Margaret was portrayed by a steely, ice-cold actress, her face twisted with smug cruelty. Liam and Ava were played by up-and-coming child actors, who captured their youthful innocence. The movie premiered in theaters nationwide, with sold-out showings. I walked the red carpet with my children, holding their hands tightly. When the final credits rolled, the audience gave a standing ovation. Tears streamed down my face as I realized our fight had become more than just a personal victory. It was now part of history. As the film gained popularity, it sparked national legislative changes. Lawmakers pushed for the Treehouse Act, which limited the power of HOAs, preventing them from enforcing arbitrary fines without due process, filing liens over non-essential structures, harassing homeowners for minor aesthetic violations. The bill passed in multiple states, providing homeowners with more legal protection against HOA overreach. Margaret, once the iron-fisted HOA president, was reduced to infamy after her financial losses from the court case and her ruined reputation. She was forced to sell her home. Ironically, she moved into a neighborhood without an HOA. One day, I spotted her at the local farmer's market. She glanced my way and quickly turned to leave, her face ashen with embarrassment. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. She had destroyed herself with greed, while my family had thrived with love and resilience. Decades later, I was an elderly woman, sitting on my porch in a rocking chair. My grandchildren played in the same treehouse that had once sparked a neighborhood revolution. Ava, now a civil rights attorney, sat beside me, sipping iced tea. "Mom," she said softly, gazing at the treehouse, "you gave us more than a home. You gave us freedom and courage." I smiled, watching the next generation climbing and laughing in the treehouse. The same oak tree stood strong, its branches still reaching toward the sky, a symbol of everything we had fought for. As the sun began to set, I ran my hand along the plaque at the base of the tree, now slightly weathered by time. The treehouse had stood tall, a symbol of community strength and defiance against injustice. My heart swelled with pride. One small treehouse, meant to bring joy to my children, had turned into a national symbol of justice, freedom, and hope, and it stood tall forever.